Hi, and welcome to this course where you will learn and master your ASP.NET Core web development skills and build a highly scalable, data-driven and page-centric ASP.NET website with me using Razor Pages. My name is Samir and I will be your instructor for this course. Together, we will build an ASP.NET Core website from scratch that is built on the popular Razor Pages framework. ASP.NET has evolved over time, and many of us have used the very famous MVC patterns and created websites using the ASP.NET framework. With evolution in ASP.NET, the way we used to create websites has changed, and we have the latest and preferred approach to make web applications using the Razor Pages framework. In this course, we will build a highly scalable blog application using ASP.NET Core Razor Pages from scratch. We will learn the overview of ASP.NET Core and the Razor Pages framework. We will then go ahead and create a new ASP.NET Core Razor Pages project and go through the files and folders that we get in the new project. We will start with defining our domain models for our application. We will use the most popular object relational mapping tool, that is Entity Framework, and connect our Razor Pages web application to a SQL Server database. We will first start with the basic CRUD operations, that is create, read, update and delete operations on our database. We will also learn how we can seed initial data to the database using Entity Framework. We will understand routing and see the different routing techniques for Razor Web Pages. We will learn a repository pattern to read and persist data to the database. We will learn how we get the data on page loads and also submit forms. We will also show success and failure notifications on our web pages. We will be using the most popular CSS framework, that is Bootstrap, to speed up the web development process along with maintaining a consistent, clean and responsive look for our website. We will also be creating web API controllers in our Razor Pages application, and we will invoke these APIs using JavaScript. We will learn and implement asynchronous programming throughout our code. We will implement a third-party WYSIWYG, that is a rich text editor, to create content for our application. We will add authentication and authorization into our project using Microsoft Identity. Along with the functionality for registration and login, we will have implementation multiple role authorization, where we will have roles for users, admins and super admins. We will also implement the functionality to manage users. We will be going through these topics discussed in a very practical approach so that every concept just comes naturally along with the practical website that we will build. Let me take you through the application that we will build in this course. We will be creating a fully functional dev blog website. This will be a website in which we create our dev related blogs. People on the internet will come to our website to view these blogs. On the home page, we will have all the blogs available to us as a list. We also have categories, also known as tags, for these blogs that we have on our website. These tags are used to navigate to similar content. For example, ASP.NET tag gives us all the blogs which have the tag ASP.NET in them. The user can view the details of any blog by clicking on the Read More button. This will take them to the details of the blog, which is routed using the URL handle. This makes the blog SEO friendly for search engines like Google and Yahoo as well. The blog details page also has the functionality where it shows how many users have liked this blog. When we scroll down, we get the functionality to view the comments on these blogs. As you might have noticed, you have the likes and comments showing up on the screen, but they will only work if you are logged in to the application. For normal users visiting our blog, we have the functionality where the user can register themselves using the register page. On a successful registration, they can log into the application using the login page. Once the user has logged in, they can browse the website as usual, but now they have the functionality to like and comment on blogs. Apart from the normal user, we have two other user roles implemented. We have the admin users and the super admin users. Both admin and super admin users can log into the application and upon a successful login, they will see another navigation that is just available for admins and super admins. Using the admin functionality, the admins of this blog can create new blog posts. Here, they have the access to this rich text editor, which they can use to create the content for this blog. We also have implemented the functionality to upload images for these blogs to a third-party cloud-based image hosting provider. The admin will use this page to create new blogs. They will see all the blogs that they want to manage using the blog list page. From here, they can view the details for any blog and also have the functionality to update any of them. They can also delete blogs using the delete button. Another functionality that admin have is to manage users. We have the users page available only to admins and super admins. Using this page, they can view and delete users. We also have implemented the add user functionality, but using a pop-up model instead. This will be an amazing tutorial by the end of which you will master creating scalable ASP.NET Core websites using Razor Pages. I am excited to do this and I hope you will have fun doing this with me. In this lecture, we will create a new ASP.NET Core web application from scratch. This will be the web application for our blog. For that, I have created this folder called Bloggy. I want to create a .NET web application under this folder. I will open Visual Studio, and from the Get Started page over here, I will click on this button which says Create a New Project. It brings us to the template page, and from the right hand side you can choose from a ton of templates that Visual Studio and .NET provides us. From my filters, I have C#, all platform and all project types selected, and in here you can select the option where it says ASP.NET Core web application, and if you read it, it says this is a project template for creating an ASP.NET Core application with an example ASP.NET Core Razor Pages content. So this is the template for our Razor Pages application. So I will select this and click on the next button. In this page, I will give the configuration for our project, which is like project name, solution name, and the location. So I have this location over here in which I want to create my application. So I will copy that and paste it in the location tab over here. And then I will give the project name, which is bloggy.web, because this is a web application. And from the solution, I will just remove the word .web. So our project name becomes bloggy.web and the solution name is just bloggy. With that, I will click on next. And from this page, I can select the framework, the authentication type, and other settings. From the framework, I have the latest version installed, which is .NET 6. So I will select that. I will not select any authentication because that will be done as a later lecture and section. And I will choose the default options that I have available. And with that selected, I will click on the create button to create this new project. It takes a few seconds for Visual Studio to create our new application, but this is ready now. So in the next lecture, we will go ahead and create our domain models. In this lecture, we will understand more about the project and the files that were created as part of the project scaffolding. Let's understand them one by one. On the top here, we have our solution. A solution is an architecture for organizing projects inside Visual Studio. One solution can have multiple projects, and in them we can consume each other as well. Below the solution file, we can see we have the project file. The project file in our example is the bloggy.web. Similar to a solution, a project is a structure for organizing files and folders in a single project. If you double click, you can open this project.csproj file. You can see the properties of the project. From our example, we can see that we are using .NET version 6, As our target framework, we have nullable as enabled and also implicit usings as enable. When you add NuGet packages to our project, they also end up as a reference in this project file. Now let's look at the launch settings.json file, which is under the properties folder over here. As the name suggests, this JSON file has configuration launch information of this project. Stuff like profiles and application URLs reside in this launch settings.json file. If we use the drop down, we can see that we have different profiles. The currently selected profile is the bloggy.web, which if you see in this JSON file over here is this profile. You can go ahead and select different profiles if you want to, and you can also change your default browser. Currently, I'm using Firefox as my default browser. If you come back to the launch settings.json, we can see we have access to the application URLs for different profiles. For the IIS settings, we have the application URL as localhost 9100. For the bloggy.web profile, our application URL is localhost 7037 and localhost 5037 based on the HTTPS or HTTP version. Your project may have a completely different URL. So to know what URL your application is running at, go to launch settings.json to find it out. After that, we have the www root folder over here. Static files such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and images are assets that an ASP.NET Core app serves directly to its clients by default. Static files are stored within the project's web root directory, also known as the www root folder. This means any files under this folder are publicly and directly accessible by the client, that is your browser. Now let's talk about this pages folder over here. The main folder inside any Razor Pages project is this pages folder. Inside of the pages folder, all pages required for our projects are available. Inside the shared folder, we can see two files, layout.cshtml and the validation script partial.cshtml. CSHTML stands for C# HTML. As you can see, the name of these two pages are preceded with this underscore sign, which means these are partial views. Partial pages are like user components, which means they can be reused in multiple places of our application. The layout.cshtml has different things inside it. It's like a master page, which we can use for our different pages. Inside this file, we have the header, we have the main body, we have the footer, and we also have some scripts at the bottom and some CSS styles linked to it at the top. Inside this view start.cshtml, we can see that we have defined a layout and we have given the underscore layout file as our layout file. Now let's talk about the app settings.json file. All the application settings are contained inside this file. Any changes made inside this application.json file will require restarting the Microsoft IIS administration. Inside app settings.json, we can see there are a few details available such as logging, default, etc. We can also add connection strings here while creating our application. Security keys related to dependency can also be added over here. We can access all these variables inside the program.cs file upon using dependency injection. At last, we have this program.cs file. With an ASP.NET Core 6 project, you will not find the startup.cs file. If you are coming from a previous version of .NET, you might be seeing that there is no startup file because everything has now been clubbed inside this program.cs file. Program.cs file is the new place where you need to register your dependencies and middleware. The program.cs file is the entry point of the application. This will be executed first when the application runs. In this file, we first add services to our container, and .NET supports the dependency injection software design pattern, which is a technique for achieving inversion of control between classes and their dependencies. Dependency injection in .NET is a built-in part of the framework. We can inject our services into the .NET Core DI container by accessing the services collection in the builder object. An example of this is adding Razor Pages as a dependency to this project. Dependency injection can be a little tricky if you are just starting out, but trust me, you will fall in love with it when you understand it fully. So don't hold yourself back from learning anything you can to understand dependency injection, and specifically in .NET Core. Finally, in this file, we have the request pipeline configured over here. By using the request pipeline, we add middlewares, which is a software that's assembled into an application pipeline to handle requests and responses. These are the middlewares that have been configured in our application by default. These are the HTTPS redirection, using the static files, using routing, authorization, and also mapping Razor Pages. The order in which these are configured is very important. Finally, we run our application using the app.run command. In this lecture, we will go ahead and create the domain models for our blog application. We will first start with the admin functionality. An admin of this blog application will be able to create blog posts and also add tags to these blog posts. Tags will be something like hashtags that we see all the time and will be served as categories for these blog posts. A blog post over here will have the structure. It will have an ID, a heading, a page title, which will be used as Chrome tabs and the name for it. It will have the content, which will have the full content of the blog post. It will have a short description column, which will be used like a summary field. It will have a featured image URL, which will have the URL to the image that we will going to use for the blog post. It will have a URL handle, and this will be a relative path. And using this along with the website URL, we should be able to directly go to that blog post. It will have a published date, the author name, and also a visible field, which will be true or false based on the admin on when they have to show this to the user. On the other side, we have the tag table or the tag domain model. This will have the ID, name, and the blog post ID. And as you can see, the ID column in the blog post is connected to the blog post ID column in the tag. So this way, they both are connected. Let's come back to our application and create what we just saw. We have to create domain models, and for that I will create a folder first. So I will right click on my project, click on add, and create a new folder. I will call this models. And inside this models folder, I will have domain models. So I will right click, add, and a new folder again, and I will call this domain. So this domain folder will contain my domain models. To create my first domain model, which will be the blog post domain model, I will right click on the domain folder, go on to add, and I will choose a class. So this will be a new class, and I will name this blog post. I will click on the add button, and now it's time to add properties to these blog posts. To add a new property, you can either type fully, or there's a shortcut to add a property, which is prop, and then if you press tab twice, it'll give you the property, and then you can change the property type and the name based on your need. So the first property we need is the ID, which is a type of GUID. So a type of GUID, and the name of the property will be ID. After that, we will add the heading property, which will be of type string. Then we will add the page title, which will be of type string as well. Then we have the full content of the blog post. So the name is content. Then we have the short description. After that, we have the featured image URL, again of type string. Then we have the URL handle. After that, we have the published date, which is of date time. Then we have the author, which is of type string. And finally, we have the visible property, which is a Boolean. You can pause this video here and you can note down the properties into your code. Now, when we create this domain model, we can see green squigglies coming under the properties. And it says non-nullable property heading, or any of these, must contain a non-null value. And this is because after C#6 or C#11, we have, if you open the project by double clicking this, we have the nullable property as enabled. And that's where it is telling us that these string properties can never be null. If you want this to be null, you can add an optional question mark and then the warning goes away. But it is up to your domain to see which properties can be null and which cannot be. So I'm keeping all the properties as non-nullable. So that means you have to enter a value for this application to work. Otherwise, it will show you a 400 error. After this, we have to create the domain model for our tag. And I will come back to the domain model folder, right click on that, add a new class. And I will name this one tag. Click add. And in here, we have three properties. The first one is a GUID. So a GUID type, and the name of the property is ID. After that, we have a property which is of type string, and the name of the property is name. So this will be the tag name. And finally, we have the blog post ID in which this tag was used. So another property of type GUID, which will have the blog post ID. And this is the same ID as of this domain model ID. So if you look at the convention, we are using blog post as the domain model and then the ID because the column was ID. With that, our domain models are ready, and it's now time to make use of Entity Framework so that we can create these models as SQL tables and create a new SQL Server database using Entity Framework Core migrations. So we will install some packages in the next lecture. Now that we have created our domain models, it is now time to add Entity Framework Core packages into our solution. And to do that, I will right click on dependencies and go to this option which says manage NuGet packages. This will open the NuGet window for me, and I have to come to the browse section over here and search and install two packages. The first package that I will install is this package called Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.sql server. So I will copy that and paste it in the browse section. And I will select this package, which is on the top, and click on install. Once this package has been installed, I will go back and search for the second package, which is Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.tools. I will go again to the browse section and search for this package. Select this package from here and click on install. I will mention the names of these two packages inside the notes attached to this lecture so that you can go ahead and copy the package name from that notepad file. In this lecture, we will add a new DBContext class. A DBContext class is an important class inside Entity Framework. It is a bridge between your domain model classes and the database. The DBContext class is the primary class that is responsible for interacting with the database and performing CRUD operations on our database tables. So now that we know why we need a DBContext class, let's come back to our code base and create one. We are back inside Visual Studio, and the first thing I will do is to create a folder. So I will right click on my project and add a new folder, and I will call this data. and I will create my DB context class inside this data folder. So I will right click and add a new class. Now we have to give it a name, and it can end with the DB context word, but because our name of the application is Bloggy, so a good way to represent a DB context class is by writing the name of the application, Bloggy, and then followed by DB context, just to represent that this is a DB context file. I will click on add. Now this class inherits from another class, which is the DB context class. So I will write DB context, and using control and period or control and dot, I will press that and I will import this package which we just installed. So that is using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So I will import this using statement. And now we want to create a constructor for this class, and it needs to send the options parameter back to the base class. So a shortcut to do that would be click on this DB context file and press control dot again. And in here we have a method called generate constructor, and it also uses this option. So I will use this, and it has created me a constructor which also uses the DB context options. And if we have the options, it then passes it on to the base class. So we have a constructor over here. Now we need a property to represent our entity or the domain model that we have. So we will create a DB set kind of a property, and to create a property I will write prop and then double tab. Now this property should be of type DB set, and a DB set class represents an entity set that can be used for creating, reading, updating, and deleting operations. So we will have a DB set property of type domain model that we have over here, which is the blog post. So I will write blog post, and I will import the dependencies from the domain folder, and I will give it a name. So I will write blog posts, and this name will be used by Entity Framework Core when it has to create the tables inside my SQL Server database. So this is the property using which I can query and then delete and then add and update blog posts. Now we have to do a similar thing for the tags. So I will create another property. So again, prop and then double tab. Using the DB set type, I will pass in the tag domain model, and because we already have imported the dependencies, I will give it a name of tags, and this will be the same name by which the database table will be created. Now we have the DB context class ready. In the next lecture, we will go ahead and add a connection string inside our app settings.json. In this lecture, we will add a connection string to our SQL Server and also provide the name for our new database that we want to create. So for that, I will go to the app settings.json file. And in here, I will add a new property for connection strings. So inside double quotes, I have the connection strings property. And for the object, I will add a new key value pair. So the key would be the name to this connection, and this could be anything, but remember to use this later on as well. So the name for the connection that I am giving will be the Bloggy DB connection string. And then the value for this Bloggy DB connection string would be server equal to, and this will be the name of the server that you installed locally inside your machine. For example, I have my SQL Server Management Studio open, and this is the name of the server that I installed as part of the setup. So I will copy this, and using this server name, I can connect to it locally and also browse through the databases if there's any. So make sure your SQL Server connection or the SQL Server name works for your machine. And then using that name, I will paste that into here. So the server name is this. After that, I will put a semicolon. And after that, I have to give the name of the database. So database is equal to, now there's no database for our application at this moment. So you can give any database name, and Entity Framework Core will use that name to create a new database for our application, because its name is Bloggy, and I can give it a name of BloggyDB. And finally, we have to write trusted connection is equal to true. So trusted underscore connection is equal to true. So this is the connection string we have to add inside our app settings.json. Now that we have added the connection string to our SQL Server database, we have to inject our DB context class inside the services of our application using dependency injection, so that whenever we have to talk to the database, the application will smartly handle all the connections and instances and will provide us the data smoothly. So we will come back to our application, and this time I will open the program.cs file where we do all our injections. After this line where it says builder.services.add razor pages, I want to add the dependency for this DB context inside my application as well. So I will use the same. I will use builder.services and dot, I will write add DB context. And using this, I have to provide the type of the DB context. And in our case, we only have one type at this moment. So I will use the Bloggy DB context. So I will write Bloggy DB context, and I will press control dot or control period, and I will use the using statement bloggy.web.data, because bloggy.db context is coming from the data folder. And to this, I can pass the options. So I will say options such that, and I will come to the next line, options dot, I want to use a SQL Server database for our application. So I want to tell that to the options to use SQL Server. So I will use the method use SQL Server, and we don't have that at the moment. So I will press control dot to bring in the dependencies, and I'm using this package Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. And to this method use SQL Server, it needs the connection properties. So if I show you if I open brackets again, this is a string type of connection, and it needs that to establish a connection between the SQL Server, and we have the connection string stored with us inside the app settings.json, which we just did in the previous lecture. So I will pull the connection string from the app settings.json inside here. And to do that, I will make use of builder again. So I will say builder dot configuration dot get connection string. And this method has an overload which takes the name of the connection string that we want to pull. And the name of the connection string, if we go back to our app setting.json, is this. So whatever you have defined as the name, please take that. So I will copy that and paste it as a string. And then I will close the brackets and semicolon to finish the statement. I can also bring this to the next line just for readability purposes. And I'll save that. This way, we have injected our DB context class inside the services of our application. So whenever we want to use the DB context class, we can just use it from the services collection. In this lecture, we will create our database using Entity Framework. We will run Entity Framework Core migrations to create this new database. To run Entity Framework Core migrations, we have to run two commands. So let's open the NuGet package manager console, and to do that we have to go to tools, then NuGet package manager, and in there let's click on package manager console. Now we have to run two commands, which the first command is add-migration. This creates a migration for us. So if I write add-migration and then inside double quotes, I can mention the name of the migration that I want to create. So this will be the first time that we are creating our database. So I can write initial migration. And then we can press enter to start the migration. What is happening behind the scene is it is taking a look at the DB context file, the class that we have inside the data folder, and then using the DB sets, it is creating a script in a C# language so that Entity Framework Core can use it to execute it as a SQL in our SQL Server database. After the script has ran, we can see a new folder called migrations have been created, and we have this file initial migration, and we have this open here as well. It has two functions, an up function and a down function, and this is the file Entity Framework Core uses to create a new database or to edit a new table. So in here it needs everything. It has everything it needs to create this new table called blog posts, and then a new table called tags. It also has given the primary keys to the ID and the primary key for the blog post, which is the ID. Now that we have created the migration, it's now time to run the migration, because at the moment, if I open Microsoft SQL Server, I don't have anything inside my databases. It's empty. So now let's create that database, which is BloggyDB. So I'll come back to my code again and then open package manager console and execute the second script, which is update-database. So I'll paste it and then execute it. And it's using this migrations file to check with the database, and then whatever is not present or is different, it will execute that. So the migration has run successfully. So it's now time to confirm if the database has been created or not. So I will refresh again. And this time you can see there is a new database called BloggyDB, and it's the same name that we gave inside our app settings.json file. And if I expand on that and go to tables, I can see the two tables I wanted to create, which is the blog posts table with all the columns that we want, and also the tags table. So we have the database and the tables created for us. In the next section, we will create new web pages so that we can perform CRUD operations on these tables. Welcome to section 3. In the previous section, we did a lot of groundwork in creating our database and tables. In this section, it's all about using them. We will create razor pages for our application, and we will perform CRUD operations on our blog post table using Entity Framework. In this lecture, we will make some changes to our application to make it a little more unique and different from what we get out of the box. So let's start our application to see what we have at this moment. I will use this button which says bloggy.web to start the application. You can also use this drop down to set your default browser. So I have Firefox selected at this moment, but you can go ahead and choose the browser that you want. And once that is done, this button helps you to start the application with debugging. So I'll use that. I have the website opened, and on the website I can see the header over here, which has two links, one going to the home page or the index page, and the other one is going to the privacy page. Then we have this middle section over here, which represents the data for that page. For example, at the home page, it shows the data that is available on the home page, and on the privacy page, it shows the privacy page's data. After that, we have this footer, which is fixed and common for all. So you can see the header and the footer remains the same, and this data inside changes as the page loads. If I come back to the application, you can see this folder over here, which is pages, and all the web pages or the Razor pages that you see on the website when it loads comes from here. We have the layout page, and that has the header, the body, and then the footer over here. So we have to make some changes so that it looks a little more beautiful than what we get out of the box. And to do that, we will first change some header styles. With the website running, I will first remove these two classes, which is navbar light and background of white. So I will remove that and instead add a navbar dark. So navbar hyphen dark, and also a background of dark. So bg hyphen dark. And these are all Bootstrap classes, and if you want to know more about Bootstrap and how it works, you can go to getbootstrap.com or just Google for Bootstrap, and you can learn more about Bootstrap and how their classes work. But let's continue with this. So with that, I will save my changes, and the list items I will rebuild and apply changes. With that, you can see the navbar has turned into a darker color, which looks nice, but we don't see the index and the privacy page, which are somewhere here. So let's go back and change them. So instead of a text dark, we can just remove it or use a text light. So I'll remove it to see how it works. And you have this option to hot reload as well. So if it doesn't work, you can hot reload, or you can restart the application anytime. So I'll come back to the browser, and if I refresh this, the home and privacy pages are now coming again. We now have this good looking navbar, and it's now time to create our first Razor page so that we can start the CRUD operations. We will start by creating the functionality to add a new blog post. In this lecture, we will add the functionality so that the admin can add a new blog post using a form, and for that we need to create a new Razor page. So I will come back to the application and first of all stop this, and I don't need the layout page for this moment, so I will close this as well. Now inside the pages folder, we have all other Razor pages. So we will create a new page for this add blog post functionality, and this belongs to the admin and admin only. So I will create this inside an admin folder. So inside pages, I will create a new folder called admin. And inside the admin folder, because this is a functionality only related to blogs, that means creating, deleting, updating, and showing the blog posts. So I will create a new folder and call this blogs. You can also call it blog posts. So I have a new folders, admin and blogs. So inside blogs, I can now create a new Razor page, which will be responsible to create a new blog post. So I will right click on this blogs folder, add a new Razor page, and I will select the Razor page empty template and click on add, and I will give the name of this Razor page as add, and that's it. You can specify other names as well, but I'm just giving it add. So now we have this new Razor page which ends with .cshtml, that means C# HTML, and this is the template in which we will write our C# and HTML code. And if you look at it, we also have the code behind class, which is tightly knit to that add CSHTML. So if you want to toggle between the template and the code behind class, or the Razor page and code behind class, you can press F7 and it toggles between the add CSHTML to the add CSHTML.cs class. And if you want to toggle back, you can press F7 again, and basically it acts as a toggler so that you can quickly switch between the two classes. Now let's run our application to see if we are able to navigate to this new page. I have my application running, and because I don't have anything in the nav bar to navigate me to that page, so I'll just use the URL to go directly. So I will say /admin/users or /admin/blogs, because we have the blogs folder, / the add page. So we gave the page name as add, so add. And if I go to it, we open the page. There's nothing to display, but we can prove this by adding an h1 tag over here. And I will say add blog post as the heading. So I've saved it, and I'll let hot reload run. And if I come back and refresh, I can see add blog post heading over here. So our URL admin/blogs/ads goes directly to our ad page, and this maps easily to our structure over here inside pages. So admin/blogs/ad. To be able to navigate quickly, we can also add a drop down over here, and we can say that's an admin functionality. So admin will have add users or add blog posts and show all blog posts links. So let's add that. I will come back to my code base, and I will open the layout page again, and that is under shared. So I will open the layout page, and inside the header, inside nav, I want to add a new list item along with the home and privacy. Actually, I don't even need privacy, so I can skip this, so I can delete this. And now I want to add a new anchor element, which will act like a drop down for the admin section. So I will create an li. The li will have the class of nav item, so nav hyphen item, and then it will also have a class of drop down. Inside the li, I will have an anchor element, and this anchor element will have a class of nav hyphen link space, another class drop down hyphen toggle. And this will not have any ID because that will just act as a button. And inside this anchor element, or after this anchor element, I'll have another UL which will act as a list of items. So a UL, and that UL will have a class of drop down menu. So a class of drop down menu, and then inside this UL you will have list items. So again an li, and inside the li I will have an anchor element which will have a class, and this class will be a drop down item. And now I can give the name to this drop down item as well, and also to this anchor element over here. So I will say to this anchor element, this will be the admin functionality. So I will say admin, and along with this class, I will also have some other properties or attributes like the href to be hash. Then I will have the role as a button. I will have the data bootstrap, so data hyphen bs hyphen toggle is equal to drop down. And finally, I'll just put it to the next line, area expanded as false. So aria hyphen expanded as false. I will also give an ID to this anchor element over here, which will match with the area labeled by for this UL, so that when I click on this anchor element, this UL shows up. And all of that is handled by Bootstrap neatly behind the scene. So I will give an ID. So I will say this is the navbar drop down for admin, and this I will copy this, and to this UL I will say area labeled by, and I will paste this ID over here. And finally, the admin drop down will have just one button at the moment, so I will say add blog post. So this will be a way to navigate to the add blog post URL. The last thing we have to do is to add an href property, so that when we click on this button, it takes us to the add blog page, and we know the URL, so it goes to admin/blogs/id, which is the add. So the admin blogs add, when we click this link, should go to that admin page, and I'll hot reload it, and I'll also refresh my application. So as you can see, we have a new drop down over here, and if I click this drop down, we have the add blog post element, and if I click that, it goes to the add blog page URL. So we have added the functionality of the admin inside the navbar, and also able to navigate to this new Razor page. In the next lecture, we will go ahead and add a Razor form to this page, so that we can submit the values from the UI and submit it to the backend. In this lecture, we will create a new form for our add Razor page, and then start submitting data from our form to our backend. So let's go back to our code, and inside here I will first open the layout file. We have this render body tag, which actually renders all the content coming from these pages, for example the add page or the index page, and it shows inside the web page that you actually see. So it combines together to form the header, footer, and the main body area. So we have a container class which actually restricts the view into a section in the center. So I want to take this container class away, so that I'll only use it when I actually need it. So I will take this container class away and save the changes. And if I come back to my application and refresh it, you can see the content of the add page now switching to the left. So it takes the entire space from the left to the right, and there's no containerization happening over here. What I want to do is I want to add the container inside the header, so that I can make it visually more attractive. Now I will come to my add.cshtml page, and I will add the container class over here. But before that, I want to give a background color to this h1. So I will create a div first, and to this div I will create a class and give it bg secondary, and this is a very dark class or color, a background color. So I will give it an opacity, so bg hyphen opacity of around 10%, and then inside that now I will have my container class, so div with a class of container, and then I will add my h1 tag inside the container. So I will save the changes, and if I show you, it looked like this, but if I refresh it, it now looks like this. So we have a light gray color behind the h1, just to make it more prominent, and I can add some padding as well. So I'll come back and give it some padding. So padding on the y-axis of around 2, and let's see how that looks like. So refresh that, and this looks good. So we have a difference between the nav and the heading with a slight gap. So this must be coming from the nav. So I'll go back to the layout page over here, and let's see what the nav has. So the nav is having a border bottom and a margin bottom of 3, and that's causing the white part to show in between. So I'll remove this and save the changes, and what you see over here now should go away. So this is our heading, and we will try to maintain this look in all our forms. And now it's time to add the HTML form, and I have the Bootstrap website open as well. And if you go to the documents, you have all the components that they provide, And you can also have the search functionality over here. For example, if I search for forms, you can see the forms coming over here, and we can basically copy the HTML. You don't even have to learn all the classes that Bootstrap provides. We just need to know what we can use from Bootstrap to make it look like what we are trying to achieve. So for example, this is an HTML form, and we would need to create something similar as well for our use case. So I will start with this form, and I will copy this form, and I will come back over here in the add CSS_HTML. And to be honest, I don't even have to paste all of it. I can refer back to this form and just need the elements, one by one. So I will start with creating my form. I will create a div first, and inside the div I'll have my container. So div with the class of container, so a class of container. Inside the container class I'll have my form, so a form HTML element, and I will remove the action for now, and I will keep the method as post, and I will insert some elements inside the form, but I have to make sure I use Bootstrap classes. So for example, I will use this first email label and the input element. So I will copy this bit over here. So this is just a div with a margin bottom so that the elements can be separated out between. It has a label, it has an input box, and it has a help section. I don't need the help section, so I can remove this. So all we are left is the label and an input element. Now let's change this to work with our form and our ad model. If you remember, we have to add a blog post, and for that we need a few things. The first thing, according to our domain model, was the ID property, but we don't supply the ID from the website. The backend, that is entity framework, gives the ID to us. So we would not be taking the ID value from the user. Instead, let's start with the heading of the blog post. So I will change the label name to be called heading, and I will delete the form, the for. The type of the input element for the heading would be just a string, so it'll be of type text. The class is a Bootstrap class, so I will keep it like that. The ID, I can remove this, or if you want to give the for the label, you can give the ID as heading, and you can copy the ID for the input element back inside the for attribute. And then area described by, I can basically remove it for our examples. Now this is one of the input element we want to create. Let's save it and see how it looks like at the moment. If I come back to Firefox and to the browser and refresh this, you can see we have a heading label which accepts the heading value for the blog post as an input type of text. Now there's no padding or margin between the form and the heading we have. So let's add a margin. So to that div we have above, I will also add a margin bottom of around 2. Let's save this and refresh it. So we have some margin, but let's add some more. So let's say around 5. And now it looks better. So we have a separation, a good separation between the form and the h1 tag. So let's continue to add more elements inside here. I will basically copy this div and add more elements one by one. The second element we need, or the second item or value we need from the form, is the page title. And page title is something like, if I hover over it, it shows you forms Bootstrap version 5.2. And we will have a similar thing for our blog post as well, where we will change the title of the page or of the blog post we are trying to load. So I will come back and change the label name to be called as page title. And I will also change the ID. And I will paste the ID inside the for section. and this will still be a type of text. Now we have two elements on there. Let's create the third one, which is the content. Content will basically hold all the data, which is text, paragraphs like in HTML, and images for our blog, and we will use a text area for that. So I will change this to a text area. So I will create a new text area input element, but I will also give it a class of form control because that's a Bootstrap class. And this will have an ID property. So ID will be content. I will paste the ID for the label, and I will also change the label to say content. Let's save this and review our changes. So going back to Firefox and refresh the page, you can see we have heading, page title, and content. So let's carry on and add more elements to our HTML page. The next property we want is the short description. So for that, I will copy the input type of text because that will just be a string, maybe of 30 characters or more. And I will change the label to be short description. And I will change the ID as well. And I will paste the ID for the for attribute for the label. And the for attribute works in such a way. If I come back and show you, I will open my website again, and if you click on the heading, it automatically focuses on the input element that the for or the ID is attached to. So if I open or click the content label, it focuses on the input element for the content label. So next is the featured image URL. So I will go back to my application, and that will be a type of string as well because it just contains a URL to the featured image, and I will have the label saying that, and I will change the ID and copy the ID to the for attribute of the label. And after that, we will have the URL handle, which will be again a short string, so type of text, and the label will be URL handle. I will change the ID and paste the ID in the for attribute as well. After that, we need three more properties. The first one would be a date field. So when this was published, or the user can select from a a date picker. So we need a type of date over here, and then this will be labeled as publish date. I will change the ID and also paste the ID for the for attribute. After that, we need the author, so that will be of type string. So I'm copying the input type of text, pasting that here, and we need to have the author as the label. I will make changes to the ID and the for attribute as well. And finally, we will have the is visible attribute. So we will say, is this visible? Let's say is visible. And for this one, we will have a checkbox. So we can go back to the Bootstrap website to see how a checkbox works. So just over here on the search, you can easily type checkbox and radio buttons. And this is a checkbox that we want to use just without the input element. So I will come to checkboxes and radio elements. And from here, I want to use, I don't want the input element, to be honest. So I will just use this as the form check. I don't want the group text. So I will use this and I'll copy all of it and come back to my application and replace it over here. And to be honest, I think there's another checkbox that exists. So I will search for checkbox again. And instead of the button group or input groups, I can actually just go to checks and radio boxes, which are, like a button over here and other stuff. And I actually need something like this with a label and just a checkbox over there. So this would serve my purpose really well. So I will copy this div and come back to my form. And instead of all of this, I will paste this new thing that I copied from the Bootstrap website. And it is actually okay not to learn everything that Bootstrap has and just use it directly, because there's so many CSS frameworks out there. If you have the time and the capacity to learn, then I would recommend you should surely go ahead and learn. But if you don't, and I mean, that's totally fine as well. The documentation is very good and clear, and you can totally easily just spare your mind in something very useful other than learning the classes. So you can go ahead and add this, and I will also add a margin bottom of 3 so that I have margin after this. So I can see this is an input type with a class from Bootstrap, type of checkbox, and I haven't given a value of anything. Let's wait for the next lecture, and we will bind the value of this from code behind. The ID of this one would be is visible. And let's give this ID to the for attribute of the label, and also change the label is visible. And we have the classes for the label. So just with that, we have the checkbox ready as well. And the final thing we need is a submit button for a form, and we can have that inside another div with a class of margin bottom of 3, and we just need a button. And the button would say save or submit, or let's say submit. And then we will have classes for the button as well, and that will say button hyphen primary. Let's keep the primary class for now, and this will be type of submit, so that when this button is clicked, the form is submitted. Let's go back to our application to see how it's looking like. So I will come back to my blocky application and refresh this. And you can see we have the heading, title, a text area for the content, because we have to parse HTML. It will show paragraphs, divs, images together. We have the short description. We have featured image URL. We have the URL handle. We have a date picker as well. And this can be different for different browsers. Firefox shows it in such a way. Chrome has a different look and feel. We have the author, and finally we have the checkbox that is this blog visible currently, or do you want to make it visible or hide it from the users. And finally we have a button to submit all of this information back to our code behind class, and we will use that to submit it to the database. So finally we have created our form, and I know this was a big form, but we have created it and it is looking pretty. And in the next lecture we will go ahead and accept the values coming from this form inside the code behind class. In this lecture we will learn how to submit forms and how to read data coming from these forms in our code behind class. There are two ways to submit and read data, and that is either by reading the incoming request and read values one by one, or to dynamically bind the values to an object and read from that. This technique is called property binding, and this is the preferred approach, but we will have a look at both of them. I will come back to my application, and in my HTML page, I want to change a few things. I want to add name attributes to the input elements so that I can read it in the code behind class. So I will add name attribute to the heading, and then I will add to the title. I will also give it to the text area and basically every other property in the form. So this is for content. Then I will have it for the short description. And because this is just an example, this is not the preferred approach. I will stop over here for the names, and I will now show you how we can use the first approach that we discussed, which is reading the request inside our code behind class. So to do that, because we have this form and it has a method of post, so it means it is binded to the post method of our class. If I go behind the code behind class, and we have an onGet method, but we can't seem to find an onPost method. So we will create that. I will have a public void onPost method. And whenever the form is submitted, our values will come over here. And this is the function in which we want to read our values coming from the form. So I will also have a breakpoint over here. And now using the first technique, I will read the request object. So I will say request dot form. So I'm reading the form, and then I can pass inside the brackets, I can pass the key name, and that is the name attribute over here. So if I want to read the heading, I can pass it as a string over here, and this will be the value for my heading input element. So I can store it locally over here, or I can use it in whatever way I want to use it. In a similar way, I can also read the page title. I can read the content. And I can also read the short description. For demonstration, I will read a property which doesn't have the name field. So I'll just try to use the ID, but I know it will not work. So I'm giving it a featured image URL just to show you that this would come out as a null, whereas every other detail, if we pass in from the form, will have some value in it. So I'm saving both these files and starting my application. So our application is running. I will go to the add blog post page. And in here, I will provide some values to the form. So let's say this is a heading. This is a page title. Some content here. And this is a short description. And I'm setting this as well. I am sending value for featured image. Even though I know that this would come out to be null, but I want to prove this to you. So after this, I want to press the submit button. And this takes you back to your code behind class for the add page. And it stops here on our breakpoint on the onPost method. Now, if I continue with this using F10, I can see the heading value coming as this is a heading. And that's the same value that we sent inside our form. After that, we have the value for the page title, the content, the short description, and we have nothing for the featured image URL because the request.form method is unable to bind this with a key from this form. So this way, we are able to get all the values from the form and use it to provide it to Entity Framework Core so that it can submit it to the database. But this is not our preferred approach. We will use the property binding method instead, which is a much cleaner approach to submit forms and to read the values. So I will stop my application. And instead of using the properties like this, I want to have public properties inside my add model class. And let's say I create a property for the heading first. So I will create a property of type string, and that will hold the heading value coming from the input element. And the way we want to get the value or to bind the value from this input element is using property binding. And we use the attribute bind property over a property. So using this, we can now use the heading property inside our form using the ASP helpers. I can now remove this name and instead use ASP-for. And now I can use public properties from this class, which is heading, over here like this. And that will create a two-way binding for my heading value. In a similar approach, I can also use the second property or the value, which is page title. And I will say this is page title. And now I can use the page title property over here using the same technique, ASP-for, and I will say is equal to page title. After that, we can also add similar properties for all the other forms, but then it will take the entire page and will look crowded. That is not a preferred approach as well, but I will show you how you can do it in a cleaner way. But first of all, let me show you if the values are coming back or not. So again, I have my input element and I will start my application. I will navigate back to the admin add blog page and I will enter the value. This is a heading and this is a page title. I will submit the form. And because I have a breakpoint, I can now hover over these public properties. And as you can see, their value is coming from the form. And page title also comes out to be, this is a page title. So now we found a way for which I can read the data coming back from our form back inside our code behind class. But you would ask a question that, do I have to create all these properties one after the other? Well, the answer is no. You can create a single object over here, like an add blog post model. And then you can have properties inside of that model, and that will be way cleaner. So let me do that. Let me stop the application and I will create a view model for this. So inside the models folder, I will create another folder alongside the domain. So I will say right click, add a new folder, and I will call this view models. And inside this view models folder, I will create a new folder. So add a new class, sorry, not a folder. And I will name the class add blog post. And the properties of this model class will be similar to what we have in the domain model. So I will open the blog post domain model and I can basically save some time, copy everything and paste it inside my add blog post model. But I don't want the ID coming from the form, so I can remove this one. So all other properties, I want the user to fill in from the form, and hence I have all the other properties except for the ID. I can close this add blog, and now instead of these two fields, I can create a property with the type of this view model. So it'll be add blog post view model, and I will import this using control dot, and this is coming from the view models folder. I will name this add blog post request because it's a request or a response coming back from the form. And finally, I have to use the bind property attribute over this property so that I can bind it back inside my HTML form. So I'll come back over here, and now it's showing me a red because the property heading doesn't exist. But now we can use the add blog request dot heading, to bind the heading to the element over here. And in a similar approach, I will use this dot page title, and I will copy this for the other elements as well. So I'll remove the name field. ASP for this is content, so I will change this to a content. After that, we have the short description, so I will change this to short description. After that, we have the featured image, so we have the property binding for featured image. Then we have URL handle. Then we have published date. After that, we have two other properties, one for the author, and the last one is the input element for the is visible property. And that's it. So finally, we have a form that we are able to submit from our Razor page back to our CS class, and we are able to read all the values inside the onPost method. So in the next lecture, we will go ahead and use the dbContext class so that we can call entity framework and persist our data inside the SQL database. We have built a form which we are able to submit and send values back to our code behind class. In this lecture, we will use this data and save it to the database with the help of entity framework. We will use the dbContext class to talk to the database using entity framework. So let's see this in action. We are back to Visual Studio and we have to write some code in the onPost method because our Razor page, when we submit our form, it posts data to the onPost method. So we have to write some code that we can use the dbContext file. If you remember the slides, it will talk to entity framework core and save the changes to the database. And we can use Bloggy dbContext by using the services. So if you remember, in the program.cs file, we had injected our dbContext, which is our Bloggy dbContext, inside the services collection of our application. So we can easily call the dbContext and our application will take care of the instances and will provide us a proper instance of Bloggy dbContext, which we can use and persist data inside our database. So to use this, we will come back to the add cshtml.cs class. And in here, we have to create a constructor because we will be using constructor injection, and we will inject our Bloggy dbContext inside the constructor. And to create a constructor, the shortcut is CTOR for constructor, and then you have to press tab twice. And this is our constructor for this class. Now you can inject the Bloggy dbContext as a parameter to this constructor. So I will say Bloggy dbContext, and to import this from the data folder, I will press control dot or control period, and then I will use this statement. Now I have to give it a name, so I can use the name that Visual Studio is suggesting me. And then I have to create a private variable of this class over here somewhere so that I can use this within the class. And there's a shortcut to that as well. So if I click on this variable name, I can press control dot again, and I can use this extension, create an assign field with this name. So it has created me a private read-only variable of type Bloggy dbContext, and I have a name as well. Some people prefer a different naming convention, for example with underscores. So you can change this, and you can also change this to underscore, and that is totally fine as well. It is totally up to you of which naming convention you want to follow, but I will just keep the one which Visual Studio provides me. So now we have a private variable which we can use inside the onGet or the onPost method. So let's use this. I will use the private variable inside my onPost, and I have to call the table because I have to talk to the table, the blog posts table, to add a new blog post. And if you remember, we have inside the BlogDB context a property set called blog posts, which is kind of a table. It maps to a table inside SQL Server. So I have to talk to this table and use a method called add to add a new blog post. So let's come back to the code behind class and try to access this table, which was blog posts. And this is our DB set. And this DB set or the table will have a method called add, which Entity Framework code gives us. So we can use this add method. And to this add method, we can provide a new domain model of blog post. So we have this domain model over here, which is blog post. So we can give it a new object or an entity or a domain model called blog post. But we don't have a blog post at this moment. We only have the add blog post request, which is a different, but it has similar properties. So we'll have to do a mapping from this model to the blog post domain model and then supply that to the add method. So let's create a new domain model blog post. So I will say a variable blog post is equal to new blog post, and I will press control dot to bring in the dependencies, and I will use that from the domain models. And now I have to assign all these properties one by one. So you can follow the order in which they exist so that you don't miss anything. I don't have the ID coming from the form, so I will not assign the ID, but I will start from the heading. So I can say heading is coming from this request dot heading. And then we have the content, most likely. So we have the page title, then the content. So I will say page title is coming from this request dot page title. Then we have the content. After that, we have the short description. Let's see what else we have. We have the featured image, URL handle, and publish date. So I can say featured image. And Visual Studio also suggests you that it must be coming from this object, depending on how you have structured it. So you can use the tab to actually fill in the details really quickly. So I'll say the URL handle, and look at Visual Studio suggesting me in gray. So I can press the tab button to just auto complete it for me. And after that, we have the pending things. We have the publish date, which is coming from this dot publish date. Then we have the author coming from the request again, and finally the visible property coming from this dot visible. Now we are only left with one property, which is the ID, but I don't want to assign the ID because the BlogDB context, when we are trying to add it to the database, will automatically assign me a new GUID. So I don't want to do that. So we have an object of type blog post. So I can use this object and pass it to the add method over here, like this, and I can close the statement. Now we have told the context that we want to add this blog post to the DB set blog posts. But now we have to call the context again to save the changes. So I will call BlogDB context and use the method save changes. So this line is very important because if you don't write this line, it won't save the changes to the database and you won't be able to see any new blog posts in your table. So with all these changes, I am ready to start my application and test this really quickly. Our application is running, so I will navigate to the add blog post page. And we have a form ready, so I will fill in the form really quickly. Before filling the form, one thing I noticed is for the is visible attribute, we also have the value coming in from the form, which is unnecessary and will impact in how we save the changes. So I will come back and make just one more change. I will come back to the add.cshtml, and in here I will scroll down to the is visible element, and we have the value property for this one over here. So I will go ahead and remove this because we are binding the value for the checkbox from this binding property over here. So we don't need the value property. So I will remove that and save changes and start my application again. So I've come back to my application and I've filled in the form. So I've given it a heading, a title, a content, which can be in HTML as well, because we'll have to show text and images as well inside our blog post. This is my short description. This is a stock image picture that I took from the internet, and later on we will convert this to an upload functionality as well. This is my URL handle, and it basically acts as a URL to the blog post. So that's why I have separated this with hyphens, so that it is also SEO friendly, search engine friendly. I have put in today's date as the published date, and I've mentioned my name as the author, and I've also selected the is visible property. So if I submit this, it should come back to my code behind class, and now it's doing the mapping. So let's see if the mapping works. I have all the values coming in here for the domain model, and after that BloggyDB context is adding this to the database and finally saving this. So it's come here, I'll press continue, and there's nothing to show. There's no success message at the moment to show, but we will work on that in future. So with that, I can go to the database, and we had none records before. So I will select this again, and we have this new blog post that we added from the form is now reflecting back inside our database. So using the BloggyDB context and Entity Framework core, we were able to persist our changes back inside the database, and we have all the values for all the individual fields coming back over here as well. In this lecture, we will read the records that we saved in the database and show the list of all the blog posts in a nice bootstrap table. For that, we will come back to our code, and I will first stop my application. For this to happen, I have to create a new Razor page inside the blogs folder of the admin, and we had the add page before. So now we need a page where we can show the list of all the blog posts. So I will create a page called list so that we can show all the blog posts. So I will come to this folder and I will right click to add a new Razor page. I will select the empty template and click on add. I will give it a name of list. And now we have a new web page, a new Razor page with the name list in it. As we have seen before, the list Razor page also has a code behind. So if you press F7, or you can navigate from here. If you press F7, it toggles between the Razor page and the code behind class. It has the onGet method, and this is what we need as well. So we want to load the records that we saved in the database inside the onGet method, or when the page loads. So this is the method that gets hit when the page of the list page loads. So we will have to call the database here, and we know how we do that. We use the BloggyDB context, and first we have to inject this. So we will create a constructor. So I will start type CTOR and then press tab twice. And inside here, I will use constructor injection and pass the BloggyDB context as a parameter, just as we did in the add.cshtml functionality. So I will say BloggyDB context, press control dot or control period to get this from the data folder, give it a name, and then press control dot to create an assign field, a private field called BloggyDB context. And now we can use this private field inside our onGet method. I will save this. So I will use the context and try to access the blog posts table. And blog posts is a dbset property of context. So I can say dot blog posts. So we are trying to access the blog posts table and then getting a list from there. So I can say dot to list, because we want to get all the items that are stored inside the blog posts. And now it's time to show this on the Razor page of the list page. So I can store this into a variable. I've given it a name of blog posts, signifying all the blog posts. You can say blog post list. And I have to create a public property so that I can show this all the blog posts inside the HTML. So I will create a public property, and the shortcut prop double tab, and this will be a list of the domain model blog posts. So I will say a list of blog post and press Ctrl dot to get this from the domain model, and I will name this blog posts. So I can use this public property and assign the value of what is coming from our database. So instead of storing it in a local variable, I can use this and store it inside the public variable over here. So now if everything will run fine, our blog post variable will have some data in it, so we can use it inside our HTML. So going back to the HTML, now we need to have an HTML structure so that we can show the list that we want to show inside here. And we will follow the same convention as we used in the add CS HTML. So I will copy the first div because it is the heading. I will paste that here, and I will change the heading, the h1 tag, to show or to say blog posts. You can say all blog post or blog post list or anything like that. And after that, I have a container, so I'll just use it on my own. So I'll create another div with the class of container. And inside the container, I want to create a bootstrap table. So I will create a table element, and I will give it a class of table as well, because that's the bootstrap class we want. After that, I can remove this tr because I want to create the t head first, which signifies the heading for the table. So t head. In the t head, we will have just one row. So one tr, and one tr will have a few columns. So tds. The first td will hold the id. Then we will have the heading. And you don't want to show everything in here because the user should be able to click on one of these and then navigate to another page to see all the details. So I will have limited information here. The heading and the ID looks to be okay. And if we need more information, we'll just put it later on. Then along with the T head, we will have the T body. And the T body needs to contain all the list of blog posts that are stored in the database. So we need some kind of a for each loop in here. So I will create a for each loop using an @ symbol. As you know, this is our Razor page, and we can write C# over here as well. So using the @ symbol, I'm writing the for each loop. The collection that we want to iterate on is the public property here. So I can say model dot blog posts. So that's our public property. And I will change the name of this item to say it's a single blog post. So blog post. After that, I need to create all the rows. So I can copy this tr structure and paste it over here. So we will create TRs for as many items we have as in the database. And the TD will be coming from blog post over here. So first is the ID. Use the @ symbol again, blog post dot ID. And then we have the heading. So again, blog post heading, and save these changes. So this looks good. It's now time to test if we are able to pull back all the results and able to show it in the Bootstrap table or not. So I will run my application. I don't have a way to navigate directly to the list of blog posts, so I will just use the browser's URL over here. So I will navigate to /admin /blogs /list. If you remember, we created a razor page using this keyword, and if I enter that, it is trying to load this web page, and you can see there's the heading for our table, and it's pulling back the values coming from the database. So if I show you the database, we have just one entry in the database, and hence it is only showing you one row inside the table. We can add the link to this page inside our drop down navigation over here. So let's come back to our application and let's open the layout page. And inside the header where we have this drop down, we only have one list item. So along with that, I would copy and paste it one more time. This is a drop down item, but it goes to admin /blogs /list. So I will change it to list and also say, let's say view all blog posts, or you can say blog posts or anything that you like. We have saved that and the hot reload has worked. So coming back, if I refresh this, we should see two links, and one of them goes to this link over here. So we are able to successfully show the list of blogs on our page. Let's do another thing. If we are submitting our form and if it is successful, we should be able to navigate back to our list page showing that it was a successful result. So let's do that quickly. For that, let's come back to our code, and inside our add cshtml.codebehind class, we will come over here and change the type of this onPost method from void to iActionResult, so that we can return something from here. And we want to redirect to a different page, right? We want to redirect to a list page. So we will write return redirect to page, and then in strings, if you go here, we have an overload method where it takes this page name as a string, and the page name for our list page is coming from admin blogs list. So we will provide that with a /admin /blogs /list, and we will close the statement. And with that change, I will run my application again. I will go to admin and I will go to the add blog post page. I will fill in some details here, just a really quick one. And when I submit this, it comes here to the breakpoint. I can now remove the breakpoint and continue on this. So it's saving the changes to the database, and it has redirected back to the list page upon a successful save. So we have two items now in the blog post, and if you see the database, we now have two items here in the database as well. In the last lecture, we saw how we can list or read all the records from the database and show them in a nice Bootstrap table. In this one, we are going to edit or update these records one by one. And for that, we have to navigate to another page. So we want a view button over here, or an edit button that takes us to another page, which shows us all the information that we can edit. And then using a submit button, we should be able to update the details in the database. So let's work on that. Let's first create another button over here, which is like a view button. So I will come back to my code. I will stop my application, and I will add a button to my list class over here. So I'll go to the razor page by pressing F7. And in here, we only have two columns. So I will add another column For the heading, I will just keep it as a space. And for the actual column, which is showing all the records, we will have an anchor element. So I will create an anchor element. And the value of this anchor element will be just saying view. And then we will have an href to this. But what does the href be? So for that, as we said, that using this button, the user will be able to navigate to another page so that they can see their details and update them accordingly. So we need to create another Razor page as part of our CRUD operations, and that will be inside blogs as well. And we will call it edit. So I will right click on blog, add a new Razor page, and I will use the empty template. Click on add. And I will name this one edit and click add. So we have this new edit page over here. Now we have to read the information based on the ID coming from the list over here, which is this one, inside the edit page. So let's do one thing. Let's give the href to this view button so that it takes this particular blog post into the edit page. So for that, we will use /admin because we know what the location of the URL will be, /blogs, and then /edit. And then we need one more information, and that will be the ID of this blog post, because that is important. We will use this ID field to query the database again and get all the results for this ID. So using the route parameter, I will use the @ symbol and say ID. And it's coming from the blog post, so I will use blog post.id. So this way, because we are using a for each loop, the anchor element will have the ID for that particular row and nothing else. Now we are passing this ID inside the URL, but we also have to read it inside the edit page so that we can further use it. So I will go to the code behind class, and we need to read the ID over here. So I will say the onGet method uses a GUID, and the name of the GUID is ID, and it has to be the same name as we will define in the Razor page. So we will come back to the Razor page, and where the top says @page, we will accept a route parameter using a string, and then in curly braces we will mention the name of the route parameter, that will be ID. And to constrain it, or to make it type safe, we will use the colon and then also mention the type of this ID. We know that IDs in our application are of type GUIDs, so I will mention GUID. You have to make sure that the name of the route parameter that you are using in your page matches the parameter that you're giving inside the onGet method so that it is able to map it correctly. Now we have the ID coming inside the onGet method. We can make use of the BloggyDB context and entity framework core to query the database using this ID. So we can inject the DB context inside our class using the constructor injection. So let's create a constructor first. So CTOR double tab, and now we can inject the BloggyDB context as a parameter. Press Ctrl dot to import this, and then give it a name, and then press Ctrl dot again to create and assign this private field over here, which we can use inside the onGet method. So I will use the BloggyDB context. I will access the blog posts DB set or the blog posts table, and then I will use the find attribute, or we have a few other ways to do it as well. You can use the first or default as well, and you can also use the find attribute because it uses the primary key of the table to search in the database, and the primary key for our blog post table is the ID, which we know. So let's use the find and pass the ID to it. using the statement, it will give us a result, and it could be a blog or it could be null because the ID was incorrect. So let's store it in a variable first. So variable blog post is coming from the database, and now we will check if blog post is not equal to null. That means we have to show it inside our Razor page. So we will show that. Otherwise, you can show them a 404 or something like that. But we will just create a public property first and then show it inside our Razor page. So for that, I need a public property. So prop, and then it is a single blog post. So I will say blog post. Press Control dot, and it's coming from the domain models. But if we show it from the domain models, it will have to be, it will also take the ID as well. So I'll use this, and I will call this blog post, and let's just assign it directly, and let's worry about the showing the 404 later on as well. So this could be null as well. That's why we are having the squiggly over here. So we have the public property blog post, which is having the information of the blog, or it could be empty as well. So now it's time to show this information inside the Razor page. So I'll come over here, and our edit page will look a lot similar like our ad page, if you can imagine that. So we will show all the properties, and we have all the properties inside our ad page. So I will use some of the properties from this Razor page. So I'll copy all of it and then change it according to my need. So I'll copy it and come back to my edit Razor page, paste it. Let's first change the h1 tag, the heading, to say this is edit blog post. After that, we want to show the ID, but we were not showing the ID for the ad page. So let's add another field on the top, just after the form. And we can say the ID is ID. And the label for this is ID. This is an input type of text. And this is for, we have to mention the public property we have, but we don't have the bind property attribute. That's why it's not showing it over here. Let's make it a two-way binding. So let's come back to my code behind class by pressing F7. And let's make this public field with the attribute of bind property, so that whenever the form is submitted later on, we will also get the new values inside this blog post. Let's come back to the Razor page, and now we can use the blog post public property, and this is the ID field, so I'll change it to ID. And for all these red squigglies that you show here, we just have to use the public property and replace it with this. So I'm doing a quick search and replace over here, so that all of it is coming from the public property that I have. So this looks fine, and we have gotten rid of the errors. And if I save it, it is now time to see what it is looking like. I'll make one more change for the ID. We don't want the user to change the ID, so we will make it a read only field and save that as well. So now let's run our application. The application is running, and let's navigate to the blog posts, which is the list of blog posts. And you can see this new view anchor element over here. And if I hover over it, you can see on the left hand side bottom, it goes to /admin/blogs/edit, and then we have the ID inside the route, and the ID matches the ID for this row over here. So if I press the view button, I should be able to see the details for this blog. And it goes inside to the edit page, as you can see in the URL, and it has the ID as well inside the route. So this is our route, and it has gone back to the database to fetch all the details for this particular ID, which is read only, so the user can't change it. And then we have all the information populated in here. Just because it was the same information, let's open the first block just to make sure if we are having different information being populated. And you can see it's looking perfect. So we have the information showing on this edit page, but our button doesn't work at the moment because we don't have an onPost method. So we have to implement that functionality. For that, let's go back to our code. And let's stop our application. I will go to the code behind class for this edit file using F7. And we only have the onGet method over here. So I will first create an onPost method. So public void onPost. And then this onPost method will make use of this public property, which is also binded to the form. So the values coming from the form that the user wants to change are also coming over here. I will make use of this, and I will also query the database so that I can update the database using the BloggyDB context. So let's do that. Let's first query the database again. So I'll use the same query. In here now, the ID doesn't come from the parameter, but it comes from the blog post. So I can say blog post.id. It tries to go to the database and find this blog post for me. So I will change this to be a variable and say existing blog post. Now we have an existing blog post, and we have a blog post coming from the form that we submitted. So now we have to change the values of the existing blog post to the values coming from the form. So we will say if existing blog post is not equal to null, then we have to change the fields that we want to change, not the ID, but everything else. So the heading is coming from the blog post dot heading. And after that, we have similar properties. So let's say page title is coming from blog post dot page title. We have the content, and then we have the short description, and then we have a few other fields. So let's go back to the blog post domain model. So we have featured image URL. So let's do that. Paste it. Then we have the URL handle. After that, we have published date, author, and visible. So we have published date. We have the author. And we have the visible property. Also make sure that you are not missing a property over here, and you can again follow the same rule or advice that you can keep these in order so that you don't miss a property. After we have updated the existing blog post, it is now time to save our changes, because BloggyDB context and entity framework is already tracking this. So we don't have to use an update statement. We just have to save the changes. So using the BloggyDB context, we will use the save. Using the BloggyDB context, we will use the save changes method to save our changes to the database. And with that, we can also redirect this back to the list page upon successful update. So I will change the method from void to iActionResult. And down at the bottom, after the success of this, I will return redirect to page. And I will use a string to navigate to the list page. So /admin /blogs /list, and close the statement. So now our functionality for the edit button is done as well. Let's test it. I will start my application. Let's navigate to the blog posts page. And let's change this blog post over here. So I'll click on view and I will change a few properties. Let's say this is another heading. This is another page title. And you can make some more changes over here somewhere just to test it out. And I will, turn off the visible property and I will change the name to my name. So I will submit these changes and hopefully our BloggyDB context will save the changes back to the database. So I'll submit it and it has correctly navigated back to our list page upon a successful update. So let's see and let's confirm if this was successful. We have the headings now, the ones that we updated, and all the other details as well, and even the checkbox. And to double confirm it, we can come back and execute our table again. And as you can see, the second record now has the updated or edited fields. So our edit functionality or the update functionality as part of our CRUD works. In the next lecture, we will go ahead and work on the delete functionality. We have made great progress as part of our CRUD operations, and we have implemented the create, read, and update part of that functionality. It's now time to implement the delete functionality. And for that, we will have a button inside the edit blog post page somewhere around here. And we will use that button to delete this blog post if the admin wants to. So let's go back to the code first. And I'll stop my application. In the edit page, I first want to show another button which submits the form or which takes you to the code behind so that I can make use of the BloggyDB context to delete the blog post from the database. So as part of this div class, I only have one button, but I will create another button and I will give this a class of button and button danger. That's a bootstrap class which gives you a red color button, and that will signify that this could be used as a delete functionality. The type of this button is submit. So type is equal to submit, and then the name of this button would say delete. So I will have delete button over here. Now to separate these two buttons, we can have this button right to the end. So I will give this div a class of dflex. That means I want to display this as a flex. And then I want to have the justify content between so that I have space between these two buttons and they are arranged well on either sides of that row. We have added the button and it submits the same form that we have over here. And if we look at the code behind by pressing F7, it goes to this onPost method over here. So how will our button recognize what functionality to implement, whether to implement the update functionality or whether to implement the delete functionality, because we are using the same form. So Razor Pages gives us a very nice way wherein we can create page handlers and we can tell the button that when you are clicked and you are submitting the form, please go to this handle or this action method. So I will first change this existing method and give it a page handler, and I will also implement that in the button over here. So I am on the edit CS.html and I will first change the existing submit button. I will add an ASP for attribute, ASP page handler attribute, and the value of this page handler attribute would be, let's say, edit, or you can say update, but you have to give the same name. So I will copy this name and I will go back to the code behind, and now I will change my method name to say onPost edit, and this edit text over here or the value will act as a page handler. So when this submit button is clicked inside the Razor page with the ASP page handler as edit, it will go to this method over here with the word edit in it. Now that we have taken care of the existing button, it's now time to also give a page handler to the delete button. So I will have the ASP page handler attribute, and the value for that one, as you're right, is delete. So we will have to create an onPost method for the delete page handler. So I will come back to my CS class and I will create another onPost method. So I will say public iActionResult onPost, and onPost keyword in the action name tells .NET and Razor pages that this is a post method. Otherwise, you can also annotate this method with the HTTP post attribute over here like this. So I will have the onPost method, and then I will also have the page handler name that is delete, which matches the button over here. And now we know that the onPost method delete will come to this method when the button is clicked. So as we were doing before, we want to get the ID and we want to first check the database if this blog post exists. And if it does, we want to delete that blog post. So let's search the ID first, and we will use the same query. We will say variable existing blog is equal to, we will use bloggydb context to go to the blog posts DB set and find the unique identifier, and that's coming from the form which we can access through this property. So I will say blogpost.id. After that, we have to check if the blog exists. So if existing blog is not equal to null, then we have to remove the blog. So we have to call db context again, use the db set property, so blog posts, and then use the remove method. And then the remove method takes the domain object completely. So we can use this domain object. If it was found, then please remove it. And finally, let's not forget to call save changes. So bloggydb context dot save changes. Now, after a successful deletion, we want the user to be redirected back to the list of pages. So we will use the same return statement as we did before. So return redirect to page, and then in strings we will pass the name of the page we want to redirect to, and that's /admin /blogs /list. I will close the statement, and I also want to return this to somewhere if this was not found, and we will implement that later on, but I can just return the view for now. But later on, return the page. But later on, we will make sure we show some kind of a message on the screen telling the user that this user or this blog post was not found. So save those changes, and it is now time to test our changes. So I will start the application. Our application is running, so I will navigate to the list of blog posts. And let's choose this one, the second one. It is showing me the details. Now let's also test our edit button if it still works, because we made changes to it. So I will update the author name and put my full name in here and submit the value. Takes me back to the list page, meaning that it was successful. Let's confirm that. So my full name is showing now. So the edit functionality still works. And now it's time to use the delete functionality that we implemented. So I will click on this delete button, and it takes me back to the list page, and you can see there's no element now, or no blog post with that ID. So we have successfully implemented our CRUD operations, that is create, read, update, and delete. In the next few lectures, we will go ahead and enhance our experience using these CRUD operations. So we will do some more advanced level stuff like asynchronous programming, and we will also create a repository so that we don't have to directly call the DB context from the page. Rather, we will call the repository and the repository will call the DB context. All of that in the next few lectures. In this lecture, we will use the power of asynchronous programming and make our methods asynchronous. You probably already read about asynchronous programming. Async and await keywords are used everywhere, no matter which programming language we choose. Talking about the .NET framework and C# in particular, we have some native functions, classes, and reserved keywords that we can use to implement asynchronous tasks and workflows in our project. We could define asynchronous programming as the way of executing programming code in a thread without having to wait for an input-output bound or CPU-bound tasks to finish. Input-output bound operations could be a file system access, HTTP requests, API calls, or database queries. So, based on this, let's go ahead and make changes to our code to make our methods asynchronous. I am back to my code, and I have to change the methods that we created inside the pages folder, and we worked on the admin section inside blogs, and we have these 3 classes that we created, and we have to make these one by one asynchronous so that we can have the power of asynchronous programming. So I'll first start with the add class. So I will open the code behind class for the add file. And in here, we have this method onPost, and we are trying to make database calls. So if you remember the definition, if you are making database calls, it's probably a good thing to make use of asynchronous programming, and Entity Framework Core helps us achieve that. So in order to change this to an async method, we will first start with the definition of the method, and we will make this asynchronous by adding the keyword async. Now I have to wrap this iActionResult inside a task. So this becomes a task of type iActionResult. After that, we have to change the way we are calling BloggyDB context. We have this add method, but Entity Framework Core also provides us the asynchronous method in case you want to use it, and in our case we will use it. So we have another method called add async. So if you start typing add async, we have this method, so we will use that. If you are not seeing this method, please press Ctrl- and pull in the dependencies over here. Now, because we are using the async method, it is suggesting us that we use the await keyword. Because this call is not awaited, execution of the current method continues before the call is completed. So we have to use the await keyword. And the next line is also from the DB context. So we have another method called save changes async. So we will change our method. Instead of save changes, we will use save changes async. And because we are using the async method, we can use the await keyword here as well. So with these 2 changes, we can save it. And now our add function should work as is. We will test all our functionality once we have made changes to all our files. So let's go to the edit class now, and let's open the edit cshtml.cs file. Here we have 2 methods, the onGet and the onPost methods. Let's first start with the onGet method. We are making a call to the database, so this method also needs to be asynchronous. So let's change the structure first. Let's make it asynchronous. And because this was returning a void before, let's make it just a task. Now we can use another method which Entity Framework Core gives us, which is find async. So I'll use find async instead of find. And because we are using the async method, we have to use the await keyword over here. Now it suggests me that there could be a possible null reference assignment. So in our HTML, we will check if this is not null, and if it is, then we'll just show a message. So we'll come back to the edit page over here, and we have to wrap this segment inside an if statement. So I'll first start the if statement, and I can use the @ symbol to write my C# code. I will say if model dot blog post is not equal to null. That means it has some value. I will open the brackets, and then I will place my section, the div which shows all the elements, inside this if statement. So I have cut it and pasted it inside the if statement. If my blog post was returned as a null from the database, then I will use an else statement, and in here I will have a div with a class of container, and then inside that I will have a paragraph, and I will say blog post not found, or you can have a different message. So with that change, we now have our onGet method as asynchronous, and using the find async method, we are able to return that blog post back to our Razor page. Now we have made the onGet method as asynchronous. It's now time to make the onPost methods, which are edit and delete, asynchronous as well. We will start with the edit method first. I will change the structure. I will add the async keyword and wrap the iActionResult inside a task. And now I have to change the usings of the BloggyDB context. I know I have a find async method, so I will use that instead. And because we are using the async method, I can use the await keyword over here. After that, we are mapping this inside our existing blog post, so that's fine. And finally, we save the changes. So we can call the save changes async method as well. So let's call save changes async and await on it. And finally, if everything was successful, it returns back to the list page. Now we have to change the onPost delete method. So again, the same theory. We have to change the structure to async and wrap this inside a task. Then we were finding the blog post in the database, so use the async keyword and await on it. After that, we don't have any method for the remove, so remove stays the same. You can check it, but remove doesn't have an asynchronous method. But finally, we will have the save changes async over here. And because we are using the async method, we will use the await keyword. And upon a successful delete, we will return back to the list page. Now we have changed two pages. The final page is the list page. So I will open the list.cshtml.cs file. In here, we are using the onGet method to retrieve all the list. So let's change this as well. Use the async keyword, and instead of a void, let's use a task instead. Then we can have the extension toListAsync, which also Entity Framework Core provides us. So using toListAsync, as you can see, it is not available to us by default. So I will click over here and press Control dot or Control period, and I will import this using statement. So I have imported using Microsoft.Entity Framework Core to use this method. And then I can convert this, or I can use the await keyword because this is an async method. Now I have to go to the Razor file and wrap all of this inside an if statement, because otherwise we won't be able to see any results. So I will say if model.blog posts is not equal to null, then show me the details of it. So I will delete everything from here and paste everything inside the if block. And I will also have an else statement, which will have a div, and that will have a class of container. And again, I can have a paragraph inside it, which says no blog posts were found. And again, you can have a different message. So if the blog posts were found, I will display them in the table. Otherwise, I will show this message. So let's run our application now because we have finished making all our methods asynchronous. Let's test this and I will run my application. The application is running. Let's navigate to the list of blogs. We are able to see the list of blogs as before. And now let's open the view button. We are able to see a single blog details. So all of the details are here. Let's change this to see if the edit functionality still works. Let's submit that. And it returns back to the list page. The records were updated fine as well. So that means the edit functionality also works fine. Let's try the delete functionality. And it comes back over here, which means the delete functionality also works. Let's see if we are able to see that message again, that if there are no blogs, we should see the no blogs found message. So I will delete this blog as well. And we don't see that message because we do not have the blog posts as null. We are having that as an empty list. So you can say here if they are not null and if this contains any. So model.blog posts dot count, or you can say dot any, then show this list, otherwise show this message. So I will hot reload my application and refresh this. Now you see that we have the message no blog posts were found because there were 0 blog posts before. This makes our application asynchronous, and moving forward, we will be only using asynchronous methods and in our application. In this lecture, we will understand the repository pattern and we will implement that in our application. The repository design pattern in C# mediates between the domain and the data mapping layers using a collection-like interface for accessing the domain objects. In other words, we can say that a repository design pattern acts as a middleman or the middle layer between the rest of the application and the data access logic. That means a repository pattern isolates all the data access code from the rest of the application. The advantage of doing that is that if you need to make any changes, all of those changes are in one place now. So you just have to make changes to the repositories that you have, and then all the controllers or web pages that implements these repositories will just remain the same. So let's go back to our code and create some repositories and also implement those repositories inside our web pages. The process of creating repositories and using them is very simple. First, you have to create an interface for the repository. Then you have to implement that. After that, we will inject them inside our program.cs file, inside the services collection, and then we can use it wherever. So let's first start with the interfaces. I will create a project or a folder outside the pages. So inside my web application, I will right click, add a new folder, and I will call this repositories. Inside these repositories folder, I will have interfaces for my repositories. So the first interface I want to create is for the blog post model, and I want to, do operations to the blog post DB set or the table. So I will first create an interface for that. So I will right click on the repositories and add a new class, and I will change this to an interface. So you can select interface. And let's name this interface now. So I will call this I, just to denote that this is an interface. So I will call this I blog post repository. And I will add this. So I have a public interface, I blog post repository. Now I need some methods here. And if you know what interfaces are, we need to create some definitions of the methods that we want to implement inside classes. So the methods here would be something like get all the blog posts, get a single blog post. You would like to delete a blog post and update it as well. So we will implement all those methods in here one by one. So we will first start with getting all the blog posts. And I know we have already done the implementation, but now we have to implement them using the repository pattern. So I will first create a definition. So I will first start with the definition of the all blog posts. So I will say task, and that will be of type IEnumerable, or I can say a list, and that will be of type domain model, which is blog post. And I will say control dot to get this from the domain models, and I will name this method get all async. So this is the get all async method for the blog post repository. So using this method, I am getting all the blog posts stored inside the database. So this is just the definition. We will soon create the implementation, and we already have a lot of code for it inside our pages. So we will reuse a lot of that. The next method would be to get a single blog post. So I will create another definition, and that will be task of type single blog post. So just a blog post, and that will be get async. And I will get this using the unique identifier, and that is ID, and that is of type GUID, and I will give it the ID name. So using this method, we should be able to get a single blog post from the database using the unique identifier. After that, we need to create 3 other methods. One is for update, the second one will be delete, and the third one will be add. So let's start with the add first. So for the add, I will return a single blog post because I'm adding a single blog post. So I will return this later on whenever this is successfully added. I will name this method add async, and this would accept the blog post as in the domain model. So I can write post as a name or blog post. After that, we have 2 other methods pending. So one is the update, and similar to the above, we will have task of type blog post. Then we will have the update async method as the name, and after that, the parameter of that would be blog post. And finally, we have the delete method. So that will be a task, and you can have a Boolean type or anything else. So let's keep it as a Boolean, which is a return type, and the name would be delete async. And this takes a unique identifier as well because it just needs the ID of the blog post to delete. So that will be of type GUID, and the name is ID. So we have all the definitions now ready inside our interface. It's now time to create a class which will act as an implementation of this interface. So let's create that inside the repositories folder. Right click, add a new class, and I will call this blog post repository. And this will act as an implementation of the interface. So we have to inherit the interface, and that's blog post repository. So add that, and you immediately see a red squiggly over here telling me that we have some errors because we are implementing this interface, but we haven't implemented all the methods inside this interface because that's a must. So let's use the shortcut. I will control dot over here on this repository name, and I will use this implement interface and get the structures for all the methods that I had created as a definition inside the interface. So now let's go ahead and implement them one by one. I will first start with the add functionality. And if you remember, we have created the add functionality already. So let's go back to the code inside pages, admin, blogs, and then let's go to the code behind class of the add page. On the onPost method, we have these two lines that are typically saving our changes to the database using the bloggy DB context. And we have this bloggy DB context because we were injecting that inside the constructor. So we'll come back and create a constructor inside our blog post repository so that we can make use of the DB context. And if later on we want to replace that DB context, we will just have to work inside repositories and no other web page. And that's the power of using repositories. So I will say CTOR to create my constructor. And using constructor injection, I will inject the bloggy DB context. Press Ctrl dot. And using the data folder, I will import it. Then I will create a name for it. And then press Ctrl dot again to create and assign this field. So now we have a private read-only field, bloggy DB context, which we can use inside all of these methods to talk to our database. Now we can use the bloggy DB context inside the add method over here. So I can remove the throw new non-implemented exception. I can take that away, and then using what we did before, I can come back to the post method and copy these two lines over here, because that's what we were doing to save our blog post. So I will copy that and paste it over here. So we are taking a blog post, we are adding it to the database, and then we are saving changes. And because this is an asynchronous operation, we have to use the async keyword over here. And that solves all the red errors, and that's gone away. After the save changes, Entity Framework Core has given us a unique identifier for this blog post. So we can return this blog post from the interface or the repository back to whoever is calling us. And in this case, we will call this repository method from the add page, but that's for a later video. In a similar fashion, we will go ahead and update the other functions. So let's start with the getAll method, and I can remove this line and implement the getAll operation. I will start by making this an asynchronous function. Then I can use the bloggy DB context, or we have already done this before. So I can go back to the list page in the CS file, and I can use this method over here, copy that, and then come back to my repository to paste it. Now we are getting the list from here. The list async method doesn't exist, so I need to do a control dot over here and import this using statement. So I have using Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, and that way I can use the toList async method. Finally, because we are getting called to this method from somewhere outside, we have to return this. So let's put a return keyword. And this method now returns the list of blog posts back to the list page, or we will make those changes soon as well. Next, we have to work on the get single blog post or the get async method. And we were doing that inside the edit page. So I'll open the logic, and inside the onGet method, we were using the find async method. So I will copy the statement, the highlighted part, come back to my repository, and I will replace that over here. And using the same thing, I can use the async keyword because now this is an async method. I can return the blog post that was found from the database, and it can be null as well if the ID doesn't exist. We are left with two other functions, which is the delete and the update. So let's work on the update first. We have the update functionality inside the edit method again. So I will open the class, and on the onPostEdit method, we are first finding the record. If we found the record, we are replacing that and then saving the changes. So let's do that. Let's copy from here to the existing blog, and let's take all of this code inside our repository. Inside the update method, I will replace this line with the copied code. Now we have to make this function asynchronous. And then we have to first find this ID. So this needs to change to whatever is coming from here, which is blogpost.id. If the blog post was found, that means it is not null. Then we need to replace this existing blog post with the data coming from the updated blog post. So I can make all of these changes over here. So instead of the capital blog post, we have to use what is coming inside the method. And with that easy change, we are now updating our existing blog post and then saving changes to the database. Finally, using the return keyword, I can return the existing blog post back to whoever is calling us. Now it's finally time to implement the delete method. And in here, we will use the ID to first find it. So we can go back to the edit page again. And we have the onPostDelete method. So let's expand that. And we were first finding if the blog existed. And if it was, then we were removing that blog and saving the changes. So let's do something similar. Let's first copy this line and replace it here. Now, if the blog was found, let's say if existing blog is not equal to null, then we have to call the dbContext to remove it. And before that, let's also make this function asynchronous. Now let's use bloggy dbContext to talk to the table blog posts and use the remove method and pass the existing blog. If you come back to the edit page, it's the same thing we are doing over here, but we will change this functionality and we will now use blog repository instead of doing all the logic over here. So after removing the blog, I want to use the context again. So await bloggy dbContext dot save changes async. And if this was successful, let's return a true. Otherwise, let's return a false. We have this error because we don't have an ID, because we don't have to use the ID like that. We have the ID getting passed to us inside the method. So we will use this instead. So we have implemented all the 5 methods inside our repository. It's now time to inject this interface and the implementation of this interface inside the services of our repository. We will do that in the next lecture, and after injecting that inside the services, we will also change the code of our web pages to use the repository rather than the context directly, because that's a bad practice. If you want to learn more about Razor Pages and want to continue finishing this application with me, please jump to the link below where you will get this course at an amazing price. As you saw in the introduction video, this course covers a lot of other concepts that are needed to build an amazing real-world blog application. So what are you waiting for? Jump on the link and finish this amazing course.